Welcome to Learn, Create, Sew. Today I'm going to show you the first of our SewEvermore workshop series. In this series we're going to go over fashion and cosplay sewing techniques. The first one I'm going to show you is how to make an adjustable elastic waistband. I was working on this skirt pattern, and in the pattern it has pleats all of the way around, which look really pretty, but unfortunately that makes the skirt have a fixed circumference, so it really only fits one person. The skirt I'm making is for a play and it has to fit many people, and because of that I wanted to change it so the back was adjustable. So I changed the front of the skirt to be fixed just like they had it, but then I decided to make the back elastic where you can change position. It closes with a hook and has some ribbon to help us just in case the elastic falls back in the casing when adjusting. You can change the width of this waistband casing based on whatever you need, and usually it works best if your hook can slide within the casing. This helps it to lay a little bit flatter, so you want to make sure that your casing fits not only the elastic but also the hook. Some of the hooks that I've used have been really bulky and heavy and quite a bit wider than the elastic, where the one I'm using now is quite a bit thinner. So just depending on your preference, you can choose the type of hook you like, but do make sure that your casing is big enough to accommodate the hook. Let's go ahead and get started. This is the waistband of my skirt. You can see right now it's quite large. Using my tape measure, I'm going to measure the front from side seam to side seam, and I'm going to write that down, and then I'm going to measure the entire back of the skirt from side seam to side seam, and I'm going to keep track of that measurement. Now, if yours is anything like mine, the back of the skirt will be much larger because the back of the skirt was supposed to have pleats as well, but I'm changing that. To make my waistband adjustable, I'm going to be using 1-inch wide waistband elastic. The amount you'll need will vary depending on the size. This elastic is made specifically for waistband. It's really thick and sturdy and doesn't roll. I'm also going to be using a 1-inch wide lingerie clasp, and I have some grosgrain ribbon, which is optional. The first thing I did was measure around the entire circumference of the waist of my skirt. And based on those measurements, I cut 3 rectangles. Each of these rectangles is 3 3/4 inches tall. This will give me enough room for a 5/8 inch seam allowance and a casing for my 1-inch wide elastic. If you want a narrower casing than that, you could trim your rectangles to be slightly smaller. The first rectangle will be the front of my waistband. This is going to stay fixed so that I can keep those nice pleats that it had in the pattern. The length of this rectangle is the front of the pleated waist. This is from side seam to side seam plus 1 1/4 inches. For these 2 rectangles, I measured the back of the skirt from side seam to side seam. This is the section that is not pleated, and then I divided that measurement by 2 and added 1 1/4 inches. So this is half the back skirt measurement plus 1 1/4, and half the back skirt measurement plus 1 1/4. But these 2 are the same size and this one's different. To make the front of my waistband sturdy and give it that nice finished look, I've used interfacing on the entire back of the piece. The interfacing I used was Pellon's SF101. It's a woven interfacing. Also, since this fabric that I'm using tends to fray a lot, I also put a small rectangle of interfacing on what will be the center back. I didn't want to use interfacing on the entire back piece because this is going to get scrunched up with the elastic and I didn't want it to be too stiff. But for this section that will be on the center back and this section that will be on the center back, I applied 2 small rectangles of interfacing. My first step is going to be to sew the waistband pieces together. So I'm going to take the center front, again this is the one with full interfacing, and I'm going to place it right sides together with the back pieces. And I'm going to sew along this side edge. And I'm going to take the other center back piece, place it right side down along the other side. So this will be my center back here, and these are my 2 side seams. I'm going to go ahead and sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now that the side seam is sewn together, I'm going to press it open. And I'm going to do this on both sides. Also, since this fabric that I'm using for my waistband tends to fray, I'm going to do a row of serging stitches along the bottom and the top all the way across the waistband, and I'll come right back. Okay, I've finished the edges of my waistband with serging and then I've pressed it flat. I don't usually have to do this, but given how much this fabric frays, and since I don't want to have to be worrying about it while I'm working on the waistband, it will just make the process easier for me this time. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw myself a guideline for when I finish the hem. I'm going to have to fold over the hem and stitch it in place. And so I'm going to have to press one edge of the waistband, the one that will be on the inside of the skirt. I'm going to press that up ahead of time, and I'm going to press it about 3/8 of an inch. I like to do this by marking double that. So I'm on the wrong side of the fabric and I'm going to mark up 3/4 of an inch, which is twice 3/8. And I'm marking it with an air erase marker. And I'm going to do that along the entire bottom edge. And I'm going to press this bottom edge up to touch my line. And if you're wondering, this is a tailor's clapper, and I use it to trap that heat in after I press, and it just sets the fold a little bit better than without it. Next, I'm going to measure where I'm going to sew my center back seam. It's going to be 5/8 of an inch wide, but it's not going to go across the entire waistband. At the center back, we want to leave it open a little bit so that we can get that elastic in and out. So I'm going to have my 5/8 inch seam allowance to here, and then I'm going to have 1 1/4 inch elastic. So I'm going to go up 1 more inch, that's 5/8, 1 5/8, and then I'm going to go up 1/4. So I'm going to sew from the front up to the top, which will be about 1 7/8 inches. So I'm going to fold my waistband in half. So you can see I've got the 2 center back edges. And I'm going to sew just this section that I've marked. I've sewn the center back together, and now I'm going to press that seam open, and I'm going to press it open all of the way down so it looks like I sewed the entire seam. My waistband is now a loop, and I'm ready to attach it to my skirt. I have my skirt inside out, so I'm going to place the waistband and the skirt right sides together. I'm going to be aligning the top edge of the skirt with the top edge of the waistband. It's the one that's not folded. And I'm going to align center front and center front. So I'm just going to fold my waistband in half so I can find the center front here. And then I'll also find the center front on my skirt. And now I'm ready to put them together and pin round. I've pinned all the way around the waist of the skirt, so you can see the waistband is all attached. Now I'm going to go ahead to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew it in place with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I've finished sewing the waistband in place all the way around, and the next thing I'm going to do is check to make sure all of my pleats and everything look nice and that I haven't accidentally caught any of my fabric in the waistband. And once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and serge all the way around this seam for a couple reasons. One is to make sure that all of this is super flat, and the other is to eliminate some of that bulk in the waistband since elastic is going to be sliding through. If you don't have a serger, what you can do is use a zigzag stitch really close to your stitches and then trim it off after the zigzags. But I'm going to head to my serger and then I'll come right back. I've serged that seam and now I'm going to press my waistband. This is the folded edge of my waistband here. This is the seam that I just sewed. And this is the fullness of my skirt. I'm going to have the seam allowance pointing up towards the waistband. And I'm just going to press. As I press, I'm keeping my original folded edge in place. And I'm going to do that all the way around. Now that the seam allowance has been pressed towards the waistband, I'm ready to close the waistband on the front. I'm going to take the top edge of my waistband, the part that was folded first, and I'm going to fold it over so that it extends 1/8 of an inch beyond my stitches. So here's where my stitches were. I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch past that, and I'm going to pin that in place. So I have the waistband pinned that way for the whole front section. I'm going to do the back later, and so right now I'm going to head to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew this in place by stitching in the ditch. So I'm going to sew right in this crease where the waistband connects to the skirt. You're going to want to make sure you have coordinating thread for this, because just in case if you don't hit that ditch exactly, you won't notice it as much. As I'm sewing, I can feel the edge of the waistband underneath, so I know I'm catching it. After checking to make sure that I didn't miss any of the waistband when stitching it closed, I'm now going to press just the front section. And the flat front of my waistband is done. Now I can start working on the adjustable back. The first thing I'm going to do is grab my elastic. For one side of the center back, it's going to be pretty fixed. It's still going to be stretchy because it's elastic, but this one's not going to change much. For this measurement, I'm going to use 1/4 of my waist measurement plus 1 inch. So the waist measurement I'm using is 36, so 1/4 of that would be 9. And I'm going to add 1 inch, which will make it 10 inches. So I'm going to cut a piece of elastic that is 10 inches. Again, that's 1/4 of the waist measurement plus 1. Then I'm going to do a second piece of elastic. This one is going to be 1/4 of the waist measurement, and then it varies how much you can add. You want to add length in multiples of 3. So for example, if you add 15 inches, you'll be able to adjust 5 inches bigger and 5 inches smaller. If you add 12 inches, you'll be able to add 4 inches bigger and 4 inches smaller. On this one, I like it to be as adjustable as possible, so I'm going to add 15 inches, which means I need 25. I now have 2 pieces of elastic for the back, one 10-inch piece and one 25-inch piece, which will make my waistband adjustable 5 inches smaller and 5 inches bigger. I'm going to set the small piece aside for a second, and I'm going to work on the large piece. I'm going to create the channels for adjusting the waistband. So I added 15 inches to my waistband. That was so I could adjust it 5 inches each way. If you added 12 inches to your waistband, it'd be so you could adjust it 4 inches each way. However many inches you wanted to be able to adjust it, you're going to fold it over twice that. I wanted mine adjustable 5 inches each way, so I'm going to fold it over 10. So I've folded this over 10 inches, and then I'm going to go 1/4 inch more to allow for seam allowance. When I fold this, I now have a piece of elastic that is just under 15 inches, which was 1/4 of my waist measurement and 5, which is just what I want. I'm going to put a clip to hold this in place, and then I'm going to mark how I want to adjust it. If you want to adjust it in 1-inch increments, you draw 1-inch marks along the entire folded edge. Since I want this to be very adjustable, I'm going to mark at 10 inches. And then I'm going to do 1/2 inch markings along the entire length. I'm going to head to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew vertical channels in each of these marks. That will give me grooves that my hook can go in. So for example, I could place my adjustable hook here to close my back of my skirt, or I could place it all the way here, and it could slide along this whole length. If you want to, you can also take a piece of cross grain ribbon and lie it over the top when you sew, and that way it will leave a really long piece of ribbon at the end. If for some reason your elastic falls back into your casing, you can pull the ribbon to pull it on out. The ribbon I've got here is pretty long. It's about 1 yard. But depending on the length of the skirt or your waistband, you might want to adjust that. Now I'm going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to create all these little channels. I'm going to backstitch well to secure it, but if your machine has a triple stitch, that is also a good option for this. You'll notice that I'm holding my elastic at front and back so that I can make sure that it doesn't slide. Also, you don't have to do the grass grain all the way to the back. You could have started the grass grain ribbon later if you wanted. I just had extra and wanted it to be super secure, so I'm just doing the ribbon all the way around. But you definitely don't have to do that. You could just, you want it to be pretty secure so it doesn't come unraveled. You could do the last 3 channels with the ribbon. So now I have my elastic waistband that's adjustable. I have all of these grooves that I can slide my hook in. And I have a ribbon to grab in case my elastic falls back into the casing. I'm ready to attach these to my skirt. Here's the front side of my skirt where I've already finished the casing. I'm going to take one of my elastic pieces, it doesn't really matter which one unless you have a preference, and I'm going to slide it from the back to the front at the side seam. You want to make sure that you can get the elastic past the seam allowance, about 5/8 of an inch. So here's my seam allowance, and I can feel the edge of my elastic right here. I'm going to grip it and make sure it's got enough space there, and I'm going to clip it in place. And now I'm going to do the same on the other side. This is my adjustable piece of elastic. I'm going to place the end that does not have the adjustable channels at the side seam. And again, I want it to extend at least 5/8 of an inch into that seam allowance. And I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew the elastic to the skirt at the side seam. And how I'm going to do that is once again stitching in the ditch. So right here, I'm going to stitch in the ditch, stitching the elastic to the waistband. I'm going to do that on both sides, and I'm going to back stitch really well. Again, if you have a triple stitch, that might be a good stitch to use for this to make sure it's super secure and that the elastic is not coming undone. Now that the elastic is attached at both sides, I'm ready to close up the waistband. I'm going to do this the exact same way I did the front. I just have to be really careful this time because my elastic is inside. So I'm going to make sure the seam allowance is pointing up towards the waistband. I'm going to fold the waistband over so it extends 1/8 of an inch beyond my previous stitches. And I'm going to stitch it in place by stitching in the ditch from the front side. On the short piece of elastic, since I need to be able to pull it out when I'm done, and it doesn't have a ribbon like the other side, I'm going to attach a safety pin so that when I'm done sewing the casing, I can pull it out. Make sure you know where that safety pin is so that you don't accidentally hit it when you're sewing, because that could be dangerous. Similarly, as you sew, you do not want to sew on your elastic, so take care as you're sewing. Here's a quick tip. When pinning around the elastic, it can be a little bulky. So rather than placing your pins down through the elastic and up through the elastic, simply pin to the seam allowance. So I'm extending my waistband 1/8 of an inch beyond my stitches, and then I'm pinning it to the seam allowance there rather than going all the way through. This will still help me get the positioning that I want, but it won't distort the fabric as I pin. Where when you try to go through all of that bulky stuff, it tends to warp. When you get to the end, you won't be able to feel the cross grain ribbon as much, so take care to make sure that's out of your way and you don't accidentally sew on it. When I get to the center back, I'm going to tack this section really good. This may bear a lot of the weight of the waistband. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew the whole back section in place, and I'm going to stitch in the ditch just as before. So I've got my waistband all sewed in place, and as I was sewing, there was a little happy accident. My two seams at the center back kind of spread apart, and that's actually a really good thing. Now I have a little bit of extra space to work with when I'm fitting the sizing. So next time I might do that intentionally, leaving this little 1/4 inch gap. Well, I didn't do it on purpose this time. I think it will be really beneficial. That way I have some space there to play with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my cross grain ribbon to pull out my adjustable elastic. Looks like it's caught on my seam allowance right now. Use my purple thing to push that back in. And next time I might stitch those seam allowances flat so I don't have to worry about that. And now I can just pull it. I'm also going to use my safety pin and pull out the other side. Now that I have this end pulled out, I'm going to add the hook. I usually like to fold it over at least 1/2 inch, and I'm going to stitch it in place. You can also attach some cross grain ribbon. I like to attach this so it's on the front side. And then again, I'm going to stitch a few rows of straight stitches to hold this in place. That way I'll have a safety net in case my elastic ever falls back in the casing. Now I have the hook attached. Now you can hook it wherever you need to. And then I like to slide the hooked edge of the elastic back into the waistband. Now the hook is laying flat. I've got the ribbons just in case. All of this will be on the inside of your skirt. My skirt now has a fixed flat front and an adjustable elastic back. And I could change the size by changing where my hook is placed. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Happy sewing!